Hey, very good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Sean.
This is Alex.
And this is Sven.
And you're listening to another episode of Coaster Kings Radio. We're in Season 5, and we're discussing Demolished coasters we wish we rode. That's a mouthful.
Sad face.
But there's so many coasters out there that I got so close to riding, or that I just never got even close to getting to, but I really wish I had ridden. And I'm sure that's the same for both of you guys.
Definitely.
And that's what we'll be talking about. So we all selected like 8 roller coasters each. It's going to be a powerful episode.
It was a fun process.
It is a fun process.
Yeah.
Especially kind of going through like...
Quite some
and there was
digging.
a lot of... Yeah, there's a lot of aha moments. Like, oh my god, I love that ride. Even though I've never ridden it, you know, like that kind of emotion.
For me,
So,
there was a few that was like, oh no, they're gone. And then, oh, they built them somewhere else. Okay, now I need to go
Oh my
there.
god, sounds like Freestyle Music Park, USA,
Yeah.
where everything got rebuilt, sort
Everything is in
of, but then it
Vietnam.
didn't.
And then stuff got demolished.
So yeah, we'll be diving into some roller coasters. I don't think there's much else to introduce. The concept's pretty clear this
Pretty
episode.
straightforward.
So I'm gonna hit it off with Flashback at Six Flags Magic Mountain. In my most beautiful Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 dream, I wandered into Magic Mountain for the first time in 2007 on vacation, and I still remember it was kind of late in the day already when I got there, and I saw Flashback like in its flesh right over there, over the entrance of the park, and I was pretty excited because I was like, oh, I kind of forgot this was here, you know, Roller Coaster Tycoon, so cool. And then I couldn't really get there. I was like, how do I get to this ride? Turns out she was just standing there and not operating. Sad face. Ride was at Circus Great Adventure before being moved to Six Flags Over Georgia and then coming to Magic Mountain as part of the... Great America.
Yeah.
As part of the Six Flags ride rotation program, which is pretty common back in the day for Six Flags to relocate rides around their parks, just like new attractions. It was Intamin's Space Diver, first of a kind. It really kind of introduced the track that we know now from Giovanola and B&M, which we also saw on Goliath, for example, at Magic Mountain. So that was kind of cool about it. Ride was built before Hurricane Harbor LA was built, which is built right next to it. So the biggest problem is the ride was very loud. People were screaming, and it was only a few inches away from these swimming pools, meaning that the lifeguards could not distinguish screaming in the water from screaming on the ride. And so every time Hurricane Harbor LA was open, that ride was closed, meaning it had really limited operating hours later in the day for its last, official couple of years of its life. And that was kind of the end of that ride, unfortunately. So it looked pretty cool. Heard it was pretty painful, but, you know, anything in Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, you kind of just want to ride it.
Did you ride it,
I loved
Alex?
that ride. I did. As a little boy. And it was amazing. My parents hated it, but I was 6, and I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And yeah, it was. It was open for like 2 hours that day. After Hurricane Harbor closed for the day, it opened for its couple of hours, and that was
so
that.
funny.
I will say it was pretty ugly, but like in a cool way, you know?
It's sad that it's gone because it occupies such an important point in the roller coaster technology timeline. So that's such is life.
So let's move on to this spectacular ride.
This is when I looked up information about this one, the pain that I felt after it closed was like it came all back, you know, and I feel like it even hurt more when I was looking this up because it's Vertigo at Walibi, Belgium, and it was the first and only mountain glider of Doppelmayr, a company that's known for making ski lifts, actually. And it was a first of its kind. I was in the park when it was operating, but each time that we wanted to go, it malfunctioned. And I remember standing in the queue of Loup Garou, and so what happened when the ride... most of the issues that the ride had were due to Wi-Fi sensor problems. And as soon as there was one malfunctioning thing, it shot into safety mode and the ride stopped. But it had very special track because the track it's a single rail coaster. and but it's a very flexible track. Like when you saw the vehicles move over it, you really saw them bumping up and down, so it was quite flexible.
Wow.
But that also meant that it could get kind of stuck, you know. So because if it didn't have the speed anymore to go uphill, then what do? So the only way to evacuate the guests was to have like a maintenance automatic vehicle that went up to the coaster trains and that had to drag them all the way over the track to the station. But I mean, it was a 720 meter long ride. It was 54 meter high. I didn't recall that it was that tall actually, but that's pretty high for a European coaster even.
Very.
But yeah, because originally it was announced for 2006 by the previous owners of the park. Then CDA took over. And during the test results already, it had issues. So eventually it opened a little bit in 2007. Again, issues. And then in 2008, they did the grand opening. Even Jean-Claude Van Damme was there, our famous Belgian actor, one of the few. And it was open for 11 days. So it was like...
Oh my God.
Because there was wear on the gondolas as well. And so I have pictures from it. And at the end of the day, the queue was open. I was standing there, and then my friends were like, yeah, but we need to take the bus home. And I was like, oh, fudge.
Heartbreaking.
And yeah, so I never got to ride. I mean, people that did ride it were like, it was a pleasant experience. Not mind-blowing, but just very relaxing, soothing, and still a swift ride actually. But yeah, other people didn't like the towers because they were very present in the park.
Yeah, I will say I just looked up some more pictures of it yesterday because, to be honest, for everyone listening, this was kind of the roller coaster that inspired the topic. Because I still remember talking to Sven at some episode where he mentioned Vertigo was like barely missed because of the bus ride situation.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, that's so salty, you know, that sucks so hard.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked it up the other day and seeing those giant towers and like realizing how tall it was.
Hideous.
And the giant numbers on the towers, like it was some like play set inflated above the park. Wild. I can't believe that ever happened, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's like a giant wind farm.
And it didn't take long to take them down because I think the year after they were already gone. So people were really relieved that the track was removed because it wasn't pretty much a sight. And if you look at the park now, it really would curse with what we have now. So
yeah.
But yeah, that's Vertigo.
Alexander, you're
Okay.
up.
So this one, the Jetstar at the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, I never had a shot at this because it left the boardwalk the same year I was born. But I grew up going to the boardwalk. My parents worked at the boardwalk. They lived the Jetstar. It was just a classic. It's a Schwarzkopf classic. It's a production model, but it's like a great ride. But I just would have liked to have been able to ride. And I've ridden other like the Jetstar. I rode the Jetstar at Sarkaniemi before it was demolished. And then the Tigger Terror coaster at Indiana Beach. Those are both Jetstar ones. They're both clones of this Jetstar. But it would have been really fun to ride this one if I was able. We went up to Oregon one time, to Salem, Oregon, and drove by Thrillville Amusement Park, which is where the Jetstar had been relocated to. But it wasn't open. We did go to Enchanted Forest, the amusement park up there in Oaks Park. We did those little parks, but Thrillville was not functioning. And now, and the coaster supposedly is still open, but it's somewhere in Russia. It's in Sochi, actually. And according to Roller Coaster Database, it's still open, but news from Russia is not always like pertinent. Like when I went to Moscow for work in 2017 and tried to go to an amusement park that was listed on Roller Coaster Database, and the park was gone. It didn't exist anymore. So like, I had to tell Roller Coaster Database, like, yo, this park is toast. Like, there's no park. But I went to a different park that was actually still there and rode their Schwarzkopf City Jet, and that was amazing. But yeah, given the political climate with Russia, I don't think there's a shot in hell that I would ever get to ride the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk Jetstar. But such is life. At least I was able to ride other Jetstars, and it's been replaced 2 times over now with the SDC Windstorm Hurricane that ran from 1992 to 2011, and now the Undertow Mauer Spinner that's up there, which is a great ride for that spot. So, all in all, it would be cool to say that I've ridden it, but I've gotten close enough within reason.
Cool. Small sidestep. I'm amazed that there was a park that's actually called Thrillville, because I remember playing the game.
Oh my god,
the game, yeah,
BS game. Yeah.
I always thought it was a great name for a park, and then they made the game out of it. I was like, yeah, it was a clever one that was hiding in Oregon all along.
Okay.
Next up, we have Volcano the Blast Coaster, which we were scheduled to have ERT on Volcano when we went to CoasterCon at King's Dominion in 2018, and then something happened to the launch mechanism at like opening week or something. I'm pretty sure it ran for like a week or two in the beginning of the season. Ride went down. We're like, okay, bummer. It's not going to operate for our events, which is one thing. So most of the event, we looked at the big ride, we rode Avalanche, and we got to admire Volcano and its massiveness. And then Girls She Gets never reopened. So that's a bummer because I was so excited to ride that. And then we find out it's closed for the event, which is one thing. But to then never get the chance to ride it again, kind of salty. Most people know what Volcano the Blast Coaster is. Inverted instrument launch coaster with 2 launches, top speed is 70 miles per hour, with an inverting kind of sidewinder coming out of the top of the volcano with some fire effects. Pretty spectacular.
Looks amazing.
Close to 2018, yeah. And the fun fact, the launches were, kind of like a prototype. And so they weren't fast enough to get the heavy inverted trains up the inversion in the beginning. So during media day, they actually had taken off every other row. So there was only 8 people on the train versus 16. And it looks really awkward on promotional materials. There's a giant gap between the seats because they could not get the train to launch through the volcano. So they didn't get that figured out until later on, so that's kind of funny. But for anyone that was so close to riding that, I'm pretty sure we all shared this feeling. Because that was one of those legendary
Yeah.
Like, they don't build them like that anymore. There's probably a reason. But, you're also never going to get a shot at riding anything that's similar. So, sad face.
It was also one of the first one that came to my mind when we discussed the topic of this episode. But so, again, I assume, Alex, that you wrote it.
It was cool. I liked it, but it wasn't like I don't know. It felt like very rushed, like the project, because I wrote it in 2008, so it had already been open 10 years. And it's kind of crazy to think back when this was being developed, because like the inverted looping coaster had only been a thing for like 6 years, and linear induction motors had only been a thing for like 3 or 4 years tops, and then linear synchronous motors were brand new. They were still prototyped at Magic Mountain for a very basic ride, the Superman ride. And here comes Intamin and King's Dominion, and they're like, we're going to do all of this stuff with this ride, and we're just going to hope that it works. And that ride was so ahead of its time and still so attractive and interesting all the way up to its demise. But at the same time, it was rough around the edges. After the initial launch and the Sidewinder, it was just sort of like, you just kind of plodded along, and then you did this nice big dive into the ugly, hollow volcano made out of paper mache and chicken wire, and it was just kind of over unceremoniously, and that was that. Intimidator's better.
Okay.
Probably Dominator, too.
Well, let's go to Finland, because... in Linnanmäki, there used to be a ride, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced this name, but Vonkaputus or something like that.
Sounds good. Yeah, I buy it.
We'll see. Sorry, Finnish people. But a Premier Rides liquid coaster. It was the first Premier coaster in Europe, and It's funny because when I looked it up on Roller Coaster Database, there was one other liquid coaster mentioned, and it says Powder Keg at Silver Dollar City.
Because they used to Buzzsaw Falls. They used to reuse part of the ride and rolled it into powder keg. So technically part of the original ride is still there as part of powder keg.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But because they seem so different, because this was clearly a water coaster?
So, Buzzsaw Falls used to be one too.
Oh,
and then they took all the water coaster part out and added all the cool new stuff.
And SNS is the one that came in
and reused like half of the existing water coaster. So powder keg is like 2 rides in one.
Yeah.
Except all the water parts are gone.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Gotcha, yeah. But I remember when looking up the park that was one of the coasters that interested me, because I'm always curious for those unique coasters in the world that have something special. And but what I read is that they had quite some technical difficulties. I think that's a main theme for all of the different coasters on this list, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But here it was really bad in a way that they could only do 1-car ops. So for a park that it is based in, it's one of the few parks, in Finland. They could only do 1-car ops because there was some interference with the sensitive infrared sensors, and a very high operational cost due to the continuous water pumps that they needed to use. So eventually they closed the ride in 2017, but they gave Taiga instead. So I think that's a very solid replacement, especially
worth the
area.
loss.
So I wasn't too sad when I was there at the park and didn't get to ride that ride, but I could ride Taiga. So
talk about a roller coaster that got a worthy replacement.
Yeah. Well, I actually rode this one at Ridden Monkey when I was a teenager. and no, you didn't miss much. It was really short. I remember thinking, like, God, that's it. It had one drop, and then you went back up and then down into the splashdown, and that was it.
Meters.
It was so short. And it was more reliable than Buzzsaw Falls, because Buzzsaw Falls had a portion of the ride where it was a flume and the vehicle was buoyant, and Vanka Potus did not. It never left the track bed, and I think that was the part that was so difficult with Buzzsaw Falls, that they were able to remedy that for the second installation, but the ride was still fussy, and capacity was bad. They were running 2 boats, I think, when we rode, but I could see that, deteriorating down to the point where it wasn't safe for them to run more than one, and it seemed like an odd fit that was not a necessary ride at that park. So,
okay.
Speaking of unnecessary rides, Windjammer Surf Racers at Knott's Berry Farm is definitely a pair of coasters that I conceivably could have ridden, because we were going to LA a lot in my childhood. I don't think I even would have been big enough to ride the wacky soapbox derby racers if we had been to Knott's Berry Farm while those were still open. But Windjammer, if I had been lucky enough to go on a day that it was actually open, and if we were actually going to Knott's Berry Farm, then I theoretically could have ridden it. However, by all accounts, the rides, both of them, were terrible. They were so bad that when Cedar Fair took over the park, one of the first things they did was sue Togo International into oblivion over the shoddy installation. Pretty much everything about this ride that could have been bad or done poorly was bad and done poorly. So it would really just be about being able to say that I wrote it, and not about enjoying it or really wanting it for the sake of wanting to ride it. So
yeah, because it's like a double wild
it was a
coaster?
Dueling. They called it a looping wild mouse. There was a product.
Okay.
Togo had this product line that was basically a wild mouse with a vertical loop in it, and that was essentially what Windjammer was. It didn't really do wild mouse maneuvers the way that the ones in Japan did, but I think they just didn't really know how best to categorize it outside of that. It was cute. Like that was well intended. They
A
wanted
little concretey.
Yeah.
And again, the replacement of this ride was a little more spectacular.
Yeah, and then they got
The Accelerator
Accelerator.
was also like a legendary limit
like-
pushing ride.
Yeah, Accelerator is what they should have done from the get go. The Windjammer just seemed like a really odd choice in general. So it was a short-lived, goofy flub of a ride, but it would have been a fun one to say that I'd ridden.
And then from one racing coaster to the next, my next coaster on this list is Dueling Dragons. We were really close to riding it in 2017 before its closure because we had to consider doing a last-minute trip just to get the credit. And then it wasn't really working out, and we figured, God, it doesn't even duel anymore. Will I really get the experience that Alex previously had experienced as a kid he always talked about?
Mm-hmm.
So we decided against it. In hindsight, I feel like I made the bad decision. Like, I wish I had ridden it. But, can't go back in time now. Salty. But yeah, everyone knows Dueling Dragons, another one of those legendary roller coasters. Universal's Islands of Adventure in Orlando built this legendary overcapacity dueling B&M inverted coaster in the back of the park that was way too high capacity to the point where they turned their switchbacks into another roller coaster in the second season of the park because they just didn't need all that capacity. Came in really handy, though, when Harry Potter came in and it became part of Wizarding World of Harry Potter. They could stow a lot of people on that ride, and they rethemed it to Dragon Challenge. There was a Fire and Ice side originally, turned into the Hungarian Horntail and the Chinese Fireball sides when it became Harry Potter. Biggest issue with the ride, especially in the Harry Potter days, was sideline issues. You were hovering kind of over the backstage of Universal, over Dr. Phillips, the neighborhood that surrounds the park. So it was kind of already looked at to be replaced as soon as the Wizarding World of Harry Potter came in. It was just a good transition to keep it for a couple of years longer. But the fire side mostly, or Chinese Fireball side, with its weird elements and its spectacular creative layout, is something that I really had wished I'd ridden. Like the ice side, if I would have not ridden it, it would have been not as bad because it's just mostly traditional elements. But the fire side did things a little differently. So I'm sad about that. Main reason that we chose not to go was because it was no longer dueling. After incidents, shortly after the Wizarding World of Harry Potter opened, there were several incidents where a phone from one train hit the riders head on in the other train, injuring riders. The state then forbid Universal from racing the roller coaster for safety reasons. So it's also the reason that every big roller coaster at Universal is a mandatory locker-only ride where you go through metal detectors and you get wanded because they take it so serious now, because it kind of ruined the whole concept of one of their biggest rides, and so now they take it all very serious. So yeah, sad that it's gone. I understand why. Hagrid is another one of those legendary replacements, though. $300 million, 7 launches, intimate coaster. I mean, you can't, this is what roller coaster fans dream of, but same for Dueling Dragons. I think it was every roller coaster fan's dream. So
yeah, it's also, I would say one, but two of the few B&M roller coaster that got demolished, because usually B&M roller coaster gets to another park when it's over, but
yeah, Universal Creative refused to sell the ride. Apparently B&M even offered to buy it back.
Because then they knew they could sell that thing. Oh my god, they could have sold
Universal would have made a lot of money by selling it back to B&M compared to selling it for scrap, but they didn't want another park to have it. And
to be fair, Universal, especially obviously Islands of Adventure, open year-round, rough Florida weather. Those B&Ms, the Hulk and the Dueling Dragons, are probably the most heavily operated B&Ms in the world. Imagine 3-turn operations on an invert for like 12 hours a day, every day in the Florida weather. I'm pretty sure that it was also getting to a point where they were going to have to replace the track anyway, because that's what Hulk went through. Every single track piece, except for the launch, was replaced because the wear and tear on the track. I'm sure Dueling Dragons was kind of getting close to its like cap out age. It was either spending all the money into rebuilding it or going with a highly themed, no sideline issue roller coaster like Hagrid, which at the end of the day, Hagrid's so popular. I mean, you can't fight it. I think it was a good choice.
Yeah, you can't be mad with Hagrid.
Can't be mad about it.
Yeah, it's sad that it won't be there when I'm coming. However, on this year's Halloween Horror Nights, they will have a Dueling Dragons haunted house.
Yes,
right. Oh my god,
that's quite.
I want to go there for that.
It's pretty cute.
That's pretty high on my list. Because if all goes well, then tomorrow I'll do it. So that's exciting.
Very exciting.
But yeah, let's go back to Europe, because there I have a special little coaster in Blackpool Pleasure Beach, the Wild Mouse. And you might think, okay, what's so strange or rare about Wild Mouse? Well, this one was built in-house, opened in 1958, and was a wooden Wild Mouse. So, if I'm not mistaken, you were able to build those in Roller Coaster Tycoon as well. It was quite...
Sure were.
It looked a little bit strange to me, but then, yeah, it was their first major ride after World War II. So it also had a bit of a historic value. I mean, everything at Blackpool has a historic value, though. But it's one of those rides that you think, okay, this fits well in their collection. And apparently, yeah, it was starting 2011-ish, if I remember correctly. There were already rumors circulating that the time would have come for the ride to be removed. But then in 2016, they even added magnetic brakes to it. So you're like, okay, so they really want to go forward with it. But then it closed in 2017 without an announcement beforehand. So yeah, I think quite some park fans were crying that it was gone, because it looked like, yeah, a ride on steroids. Did you ride it, Alex?
It was great.
Yeah.
It was freaking terrifying.
Yeah.
And I was not surprised one bit when it just unceremoniously, like, people went to the park and it was gone. Like, there wasn't, not only was there not an announced closure, but, like, the park opened for the season and it was just, and it wasn't there anymore. It had been quietly demolished and cleaned up and vacated. So people were really upset about the nature of the removal of it, but God, that thing was scary. Like, I was not surprised at all. Like, I could not believe that it was running. I mean, it was running really well. It was just amazing that a ride like that lasted as long as it did, because I was like, this is a liability. I was with people who got really hurt. Like, you would normally, it used to be you had to ride 2 people per car. Okay. I guess because it used to not have seatbelts, and I guess you would ride 2 people to cars so that, like, the person behind you could hold on to you to keep you from flying out. But when I rode, they had seatbelts and you could ride by yourself. But people who opted to ride together, I know one person like, nearly broke his nose.
Oh, wow.
Because he hit the back of the head of the person that he was riding with. And I'm just like, this ride is a freaking death trap. Like, there's just no way that this is going to last.
Yeah, now I saw that they sometimes do like a pop-up restaurant thingy there. It's a bit sad, because they said that they would replace it for future attractions, but yeah.
Hopefully someday they'll put something, like, cool there, and it will feel like a worthy replacement. All right, so my next coaster is Drachenfire at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, which is a roller coaster that I was very fond of. In theory, I would watch the America's Greatest Roller Coaster Thrills in 3D cassette tape. 3D. I watched it to the point where, like, we had to replace it more than once, because I would watch it every day, multiple times a day. And Drachenfire, I think at the time, was the coolest ride on there. And I just thought the layout was neat, the aesthetic, like the colors and stuff. And I was devastated when I found out. I was actually at Disneyland, and we were waiting in line. This is so funny. We were at Disneyland, and we were waiting in line for rocket rods at Disneyland. Oh, and the people in front of us in line were talking about Busch Gardens Williamsburg. And they were talking about Drachenfire. And I couldn't help but overhear and ask about it. And they were like, dude, like, Drachenfire's gone. Like, this was probably 1998 or 99. And they were like, Drachenfire's gone. They demolished it. And I was devastated. Like, I could not believe that the roller... I didn't want to believe it, because I didn't think it could possibly be true, because nothing that cool looking, that was really not that old, was gone. But obviously, sure enough, it was gone. And it only ran 6 seasons. There was a myriad of issues with it. There was fulfillment issues on Arrow's side. There was design issues on Arrow's side. But a couple years in, they took the first corkscrew after the mid-course brake run. They took that out to improve rider comfort, basically so that they could slow down the back half of the ride. They did all sorts of they messed around with it. They did what they could, I guess. But after 6 years, it just they called it quits. They opened Alpengeist in 1997, and that was a good consolation prize, I think, for the park and to distract people from it. And then after it was demolished, they followed up with Apollo's Chariot. Building those two coasters back to back, such amazing rides that are still have such impact in the industry. Yeah. There are still two of the country's best rides. It was like part of that was doing those so quickly in succession was partially related to Drachenfire and the damage control that they had to do because that amazing, hyped up, signature, modern ride ended up being a complete failure.
Yeah, it's sad. That was high on my list too, I think. I still vividly remember RCDBing in my early coaster fandom days. You know, you would just kind of endlessly RCDB stuff. And just looking at the photos of that highly elevated corkscrew that then became a drop,
it was so cool.
I mean, and then the support structures with those big triangular supports. It looked like an arrow out of your wildest dreams, like almost like it wasn't an arrow, which I guess is also the problem with the ride. Arrow was trying to imitate B&M and come for B&M, but they could never get close to the design quality. And Drachenfire, I think, was the last nail in that coffin.
Yeah.
Speaking of Arrow and last nails and coffins and all that kind of good stuff.
This one opened the same year, too.
Eagle's Fortress, or Eagle Fortress, in Everland is my next coaster. I think a lot of people know what this is, too. In the Arrow Suspended Coaster Lexicon, there were a couple of really cool standouts. I think this is the one. The benefits of rides like Bat at Kings Island is that you have an Arrow Suspended Coaster that uses its height and speed and just kind of like uses it to just do a bunch of twists and turns at a high speed. And that's what's so great about the Bat at Kings Island. And that's practically all that Eagle Fortress did, except it was in a densely wooded forest. And if you've seen any of the videos that, for example, TPR have put out, it's just insane, the amount of swinging and the banking on the turns. At one point, your car is going in the opposite direction of where the track is going. It makes sense that it didn't last, because to be honest, I'm sure that track was full of fractures, because the wear and tear on a roller coaster like Eagle Fortress must have been insane. Doesn't mean I didn't want to ride it, though. It did last from 1992 until 2009, so decently long, 17 years. Last long as Drachenfire, and honestly, I think I'm so beat up that there was no saving it at the end. Quite long, too, about 3,200 feet, which is 976 meters, almost a kilometer long. Top speed of 65 kilometers an hour, not bad for a suspended coaster. Overall, another one of those fever dream Arrows where I think they did a little more than they could really support in quality. Just a little bit. So yeah, it's sad, understandable. Also very far away, so I don't think I have an emotional sadness about it. It's not like I just stood there watching it, exist and then didn't get to ride. It's just one of those rides on my list where I'm like, wow, that would have been so cool if I would have gotten on that.
Let's go to Spain, to Terra Mítica. It's a bit of a weird park. I haven't visited it yet, but I mean, last couple of years they've done some weird decisions. However, there is one painful thing that is still in that park as well, and that's Magnus Colossus standing there on top of the rocky hills and standing but not operating, because it's quite a long wooden coaster. I mean, already wooden coasters in Spain are pretty rare, because obviously you have the ones
at Parque
Warner, and you have the one
they're also pretty long, so
in Portaventura, yeah. But then this one was, I mean, for the park, it was definitely one of the major coasters when the park opened. But yeah, same old story, high maintenance costs, and then also, well, it can get pretty warm in Spain. So the expansion of the wood because of the heat caused that also the supports were expanding, so it wasn't really safe anymore to have the ride open. So it operated from 2000 to 2015. And what I also noticed then when I saw some of the on-ride videos is that it had a bit of a weird pacing, because it seemed that it ran a lot slower towards the end of its days compared to in the beginning. It might just be wrong impressions from my side, but I still would like to visit the park, because not only is it unlikely that the coaster will reopen, I mean, you never knows, but I feel that the strategy of the park also endangers the existence of the park. So and they have a dark ride that I'd really like to try out, because it's a Sally dark ride similar to Challenge of Tutankhamun in Walibi, Belgium, but based on the Minotaur. So that's one of the reasons why I'd like to visit the park. And but then again, yeah, seeing a coaster like that is closed. I remember going to Hyde Park and seeing Colossus closed, and that was very painful. So I feel like here it would be the same story as well. So I guess that's one of the reasons why I haven't visited the park yet. But
fair enough. If there's one coaster just looming over the park,
I know.
it's Terra Mythica's. Right, it's just one of those parks where Magnus Colossus really is kind of like the park. When I think about that park, it's all I really think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's their only notable coaster. They've got an SLC. I guess that's notable for Spain, but
and a Zack Spin.
Probably not for
The Zack Spin.
Oh yeah, they do have a Zack Spin.
The Zack Spin.
Did that kill people?
Yeah.
Okay, it did. All right, I wasn't. Yeah. Okay, I do.
That one.
Yeah, I remember that one.
That one.
Oh, it's my turn again. Okay. Titan Max at Space World in Fukuoka, Japan. This was one of the trio of aerodynamics mega coasters. I guess you could say they're hyper coasters, because 2 out of the 3 of them were over 200 feet tall. But in 1994, Aerodynamics opened Desperado in Prime, Nevada. They opened the Pepsi Max big one at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, and they opened Titan at Space World. And Titan followed a similar formula to these rides. It looked a little bit like Magnum. It had the same trains as Magnum, so it definitely seemed like they were very kindred to each other, more so than even the other coasters that were built in that year by Aero. And it followed a pretty straightforward hypercoaster formula until you got to the far end, and it had the stupid, amazing butterfly element thing that Anaconda at King's Dominion does, but, on a hypercoaster with a 3-bench train, so, it navigated that thing, really bizarrely. Again, TPR has a great video of this ride in action. Not, the best airtime machine or anything, but just certainly interesting and weird, and, as an aero enthusiast, this would have been a really fun one to have been able to ride and say that I'd ridden. Space World closed... I think Space World closed at the end of 2016 or 2017?
2017.
And the ride was demolished. It was sold for scrap. There was no good likelihood of that ride reopening. However, another coaster of theirs, the Schwarzkopf and Mauer Venus GP roller coaster, was successfully sold, relocated, and has reopened at Himeji Central Park and Zoo, near Osaka in Japan. So at least one of Space World's more interesting rides is still rideable and is still in great shape. And I also had heard a few years before the park Space World closed, Titan got new trains from, I forget where they came from. They changed the rolling stock, and according to a friend of ours who rode it, or had gotten testimonies from people who rode it, the new trains that the ride got, were bad, and they were tracking really poorly.
It's funny, because it also lowered capacity on the train, too, if I'm not mistaken.
So as far as I'm understanding, that the ride already kind of was ruined and wasn't even that good. Once the Magnum trains were gone, the ride was already sucked, and then the whole park demolished, and so there was really no shot at it for us. But
I want to make a
interesting
quick
ride.
note, though, about Space World. It's like, it's kind of like a fever dream, you know? It's like a name you'd give in Roller Coaster Tycoon Park, Space World. And then everything is somehow related to space.
They had a log flume
kind of a
where you
vibe.
like dropped out of a flying saucer that was
Crashed into a
wedged
volcano
in
or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they had a coaster
That's
called the
funny.
Boogie Woogie Space Coaster. That was
Yeah,
their
everything
kiddie
was like
coaster.
loosely space themed, which Asian parks are really good at picking one theme for the whole park and
Yeah.
making it work.
They had an Intamin hydraulic launch coaster, a clone of Stealth at Thorpe Park. That was like kind of the beginning of the end for them, because apparently that ride was a money pit for them. And with the economic downturn that Japan was experiencing and the recession of regional parks in that country, it was just the park just wasn't meant to be, unfortunately, going forward for Space World. But an interesting piece of aerodynamics coaster history nonetheless.
So yeah, next on our list of maintenance killed this bad boy. Batman and Robin the Chiller. Where to start? First of all, another one of those coasters everyone knows. Sick Great Adventure from 1998 through 2007. It was part of Premier's grand entrance into the market of, building the Mr. Freezes, the Flight of Fears, Poltergeist, all the good stuff. And then they built a super unique Batman and Robin the Chiller, which was a racing LSM launched Premier roller coaster where one side, the Batman side, had a giant top hat, followed by kind of like a barrel roll into a sloped upward hill, after which it would be boosted up a little bit to do the same thing in reverse. And then you had the Chiller, or the Robin side, which was a Cobra roll, followed by a Zero-G roll, barrel roll into that same upward slope, and just to do it all backwards again. Downside of this ride was that the power grid just simply couldn't support two of these launch coasters launching at the same time without it going down. So it meant that they would really only launch one at a time. They would occasionally operate at the same time, but that would just mean that the trains would not launch simultaneously, or just one side would work. And then, amazingly, for the 2007 season, they took out the hardline rolls that were leading to the spike just to replace them with these weird airtime hills. And then that was the last season for the ride altogether. It seems kind of like they put a lot of money into it at the end and still decided to call it quits. But that's just one of those legendary 90s roller coasters that I'd wish I'd ridden. We were at Great Adventure the other day, and you can still see the giant dome structure that both trains would launch through on their way to their inversions. Okay. And it's wild. Like, you could just see it was right there, and now it's some sort of gaming pavilion. But it's sad because, I know it used to be Batman and Robin Chiller. Did you? No, you didn't write it.
No, I did not write this one.
Finally, one Alex has
one that I didn't write.
So
the
next
one, I think it was 1 or 2 years ago that we went to Center Parks in the Eifel area in Germany. And funnily enough, I had a request to go to a racing track. And it was in the middle of winter, so January, February. And we went there. And the reason that we wanted to go is to see the ring racer. Still there, standing but not operating. And obviously for European fans who definitely know it as, originally announced as, at the time, the fastest roller coaster in the world. But that did not happen because when they were testing, they never reached the top speed that they wanted to reach of 135 miles per hour, so 217 kilometers per hour. That was the goal, but eventually they only made it to 160 kilometers per hour.
That's so weak.
Yeah, it's not the same thing. And so they did, in 2009, a soft launch with some celebrities. I think Michael Schumacher was even there. But, that didn't take too long because they had to continue working on the ride because there were some issues. And then an explosion happened.
I remember hearing about that.
Yeah.
The air tanks.
The air tanks, 7 staff members injured, windows nearby shattered, shattered. Sorry.
Yeah.
That shuttered is a different thing. It's not
not that. It's much more serious than shuttering the windows.
Yeah. Because of unexpected pressure releases in the system.
It's crazy.
But eventually, it took until 2013 to open the ride at the end of October, 31st of October on Halloween. And after 4 days, it closed. So that was the amount of time that you were able to ride that coaster. But to be fair, like, if you see the layout, it doesn't look that special because it's basically one launch, just a figure eight and back. But what were you going to say, Sean?
Well, I will say my family had a house, has a house in the Eifel area of Germany. So we were in that region once a month at the least. And we drove by that racetrack all the time. And I was on my RCDP shit. And I knew that they were building that. And it was so cool. And I wanted to go there one day. And had all those problems. And then in 2013, I could not believe they actually opened the thing. Even if it was just for a couple of days. Because it seemed like one of those things that was never going to happen. And then realistically, like you mentioned, the ride really didn't do a whole lot. It was going to launch really fast, then throw into a bunch of breaks, then have a weird figure eight. And then the coolest part for me, I think, besides the launch, was going through all of the buildings, kind of just coasting through them, like suspended from the ceiling. Yeah. But yeah, there was all this effort, all these problems, all these injuries, all this shattering for what was realistically not even that great of a ride. Yeah. That's the wildest thing, because I remember being so hyped up about it, too, because it was a realistic thing for me to ride if they had actually opened it when they were supposed to open it. So I was looking forward to it so much.
I would have been able to ride it, too, because it was on the itinerary for the ACE 2013 Germany trip. And at the time, they were like, we had a plan A and a plan B, because we didn't know if it was going to be open or not until we were already in Germany. And obviously, we did other things, because...
For all the rides on this list that we've all three gotten so close to riding, I did not think it was going to be this one.
It was nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Not all three of us.
Because even I remember
having been able to plan to ride this.
Even I remember, it's a doable drive to go there for the opening or for to be one of the first one to ride it, and then eventually I chose not to. But then, I should have.
That's so wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you were there at opening, it would have been the only shot at it ever. Yeah.
But still, when walking around that area, I find it really impressive to see just the track, because it's it's stunning.
Fortunately, SNS recovered a little bit from that with some of the stuff they're doing now. You can always ride Max Force at Six Flags Great America. Sort of
and their product line in China has taken off. The LSM, their pneumatic launchers in China have been decently successful. There is hope.
Hope.
I think it wasn't only the technical issues, but also financially the
money pit.
The park was lost, and so I think someone else bought the area, but they just didn't find it feasible to open the coaster because it wouldn't bring any extra money, so that's why it's there. It's standing there.
Yeah, exactly. Another problem with a ride like that is you have it at a venue that's really not open every day. It's not super convenient. You're not just gonna drop by to ride the coaster.
Niche.
So at the end of the day, it didn't even make that much sense at all. It was more of a power trip, really. Right? That's how I look at it.
All right.
Next up, talk about power trips.
Talking about a roller coaster that doesn't make sense. The Moonsault Scramble at Fuji Q Highland. This is the original giant inverted boomerang. I guess it's a giant sit-down. This was a 203-foot tall shuttle loop roller coaster. This ride was designed at the same time that Vekoma designed the boomerang. Roller coasters at the time did not have that many inversions, and they weren't that tall. And Meisho, Japanese legacy roller coaster designer, and in conjunction with Vekoma, together designed this absolutely batshit crazy shuttle loop coaster for Fuji Q Highland in 1983. It was the first roller coaster of any kind to come anywhere near the hypercoaster realm. The top of the ride being 203 feet. I don't think even any of the train traveled to 200 feet, but the ride was absolutely massive. And it was, instead of a cobra roll at the end of it, it looked like a giant boomerang. But instead of a cobra roll, there was no vertical loop. It was just 2 spikes, 2 very big parabolic spikes, and a giant pretzel loop, as I called it, a pretzel knot, where you entered and exited it in sort of a boomerang formation, sort of like a batwing, except that the entrance and exits of the batwing were super elongated into a pretzel shape. And this thing was iconic. It apparently it pulled 6.5 positive Gs, and with its one train operations and an immense size and might, I mean, it attracted people from all over Japan. Frequently, people would wait hours and hours and hours to ride it, and it actually lasted. This thing ran until 2000. Fujiyama was sort of like the spiritual successor to it. That became like the new sweetheart at Fuji Q Highland. And then the physical successor, the ride that occupied some of the space that was left by the Moonlight Scramble, would be 2001's Dododampa, another trebled SNS compressed air roller coaster. I remember I saw like Moonlight Scramble on like the Travel Channel, and in looking back, it's just like I wouldn't have believed that this roller coaster ever existed if I wasn't alive at the same time that it existed, you know? Because I just can't believe that a ride that size, doing those things, opened in 1983 and then didn't even see the 21st century.
It's funny because in a way it's such a Fuji Q ride.
So Fuji Q.
Fuji Q only builds like the wildest things. Yeah. Generally speaking. Yeah.
Because then they followed that up with Ishineika. It's like the 3 consecutive roller coasters where they just try to kill you, basically. And that trend, that legacy really began with Moonlight Scramble.
Moonlight Scramble. I think the name is so sick.
It's so sick.
Moonlight Scramble.
Yeah. I didn't know the coaster, but when I looked it up, I was like, I want to ride this. You know?
Isn't that sick?
And
for those of you who don't know, a moonsault is a wrestling move where you throw your opponent on the ground and then do a backflip on top of them.
That's the Moonlight Scramble.
Exactly what the roller coaster does. Like, naming game, 10 out of 10.
Wow.
So the next coaster on the list, we actually got pretty close to riding. It's Stingray at the Sucho Ferris wheel park, which we were in Sucho and that whole region for a little bit. And the Stingray is a Vekoma production model that was only ever built once. And yeah, it's kind of a weird way of describing it. It's like a super compact flying coaster, only 8 riders, 2 rows of 4, where you would fold backwards as onto your back, kind of like the traditional Vekoma Flying Dutchman, and then go up a vertical lift, and then you would dive down, have a couple of cool elements like a horseshoe, and this weird like reverse Immelman and what they call like a Stingray curve. It's all a lot of fancy language, but practically it was a really unusual flying coaster that wasn't very big, but it was quite tall. It was 103 feet tall, only 1,200 feet long. It didn't do the most, but it was just super different and unique. And not to bring TPR back into this, but I saw one of their videos and I was like, this looks really neat, and it's right by the water. Just one of those one-off rides you kind of want to try out, and it's not a ride I expected to close as early as it did, because it only really lasted from 2009 to 2018. So it was the fall before we went that it was closed, and I would have loved to have ridden it. Like, it just looked like a cool ride. And I like my Vekomas, obviously, and that was one of those, like, okay, new age Vekoma, gotta ride it.
Totally.
Yeah, unfortunately, that was not in the cards.
And do we know why they only made one?
They only made that one.
Yeah, they only made that one.
It wasn't very good capacity. It wasn't that long or that spectacular of a ride.
But it was like it was a side attraction to this giant Ferris wheel that they have in Sucho.
Yeah.
And the park itself wasn't really even a park, if I'm not mistaken. It was more like a public place. You could kind of just walk around.
Okay.
But yeah, the positioning of the ride was gorgeous, and having a super steep drop, like on the flying coaster, it was almost vertical. Like, it was a steep drop, but a giant horseshoe element. Like, it was honestly a pretty, it looked pretty intense and forceful when you look at the shape and size of it.
Oh, I haven't even seen those pictures before. It looks really cool.
Right? It looks really cool.
Yeah.
It looks like
I
something
remember
that
wanting
had
to ride it
potential.
as well. Yeah.
Sad.
Such a shame. But I guess
Such
we
a
have
shame.
Fly now.
Yeah, and now we have
True.
Fly. Yeah.
Fly is a whole different beast, literally. Next.
Now, the next one on the list is a bit of a special one because I wouldn't even consider it a different credit. But
I might.
You guys probably would. So the first time I went to Disneyland Paris, I was too small and too much of a scaredy cat to ride inversion roller coasters. Because not only was Indiana Jones there, but also the original Space Mountain was open. I remember seeing through the windows to my dad riding. I didn't see my dad riding, but I saw the roller coaster riding there. So I could have been on the Terre de la Lune, but such a shame. And then the second time that we went back, that was like, okay, maybe I should try a roller coaster that goes upside down this time. And the one that I was standing in front of was Indiana Jones. However, I think it was probably one of the reasons that held me back of riding it. It was going backwards that time. Because what happened was with the opening of Space Mountain, they wanted to draw back the attention a little bit to Indiana Jones. So that's why they decided to change the direction, make the trains go backwards. They adapted the trains from 8 to 12 persons as well for that. And they had to change all the props, all the lights, reverse everything. And so, yeah, from 2000 to 2004, it was going backwards. And I didn't do it. And now I regret it deeply. It's one of those things that I bring up from time to time. It's like, yeah, I shouldn't have ridden it. But, I think there's a few reasons why they changed it back to forward, because it was more intense from what I heard.
I heard it hurt.
Yeah, and that it hurt.
I mean, forward kind of hurts. I couldn't imagine riding this thing backward. I mean, I would love it, because I love rides that kick your ass, but
yeah,
for this one, I feel like there's a fine line, and my understanding is that this one was a one and done for people, and that like ridership for the ride went up, and then it really quickly went down again, just like a roller coaster.
Yeah. And then also, they closed Space Mountain for Mission 2, the transition to Mission 2, so that was also one of the reasons, like, we should give a roller coaster that goes forward that people like and that goes upside down. So
oh, true.
That's
I do love Disneyland Paris, and they can never leave good enough alone. For better or for worse, they're like, they always want to do something different or better.
Yeah, when you think about it, all their looping coasters have gone through significant changes. Yeah.
Like, all of their loopers are now on their third identity of sorts. But yeah, speaking of Intamin loopers, the next one, I like to think of Cop Car Chase. It was Lethal Weapon Pursuit when it opened at Warner Brothers Movie World in Germany. I feel like Cop Car Chase, as it was called in the last few years of its existence, was sort of like the next step after Indiana Jones. And I think that was there. I bet Indiana Jones was sort of like its inspiration, because the parks aren't that far from each other in the grand scheme of things. And they were conceptually very similar, except that Cop Car Chase was 2. But it was the same product line, side by side. They each had a vertical loop, and Cop Car Chase, in this case, had 0 G rolls after. It was the first, like, traditional looping coaster to have a 0 G roll, actually.
A barrel roll.
Or a barrel roll, yeah. This was a really neat ride that Sean actually got to ride. Yeah. This is one that he has that I do not have. So that was really the first coaster that came to mind when we talked about this subject was Cop Car Chase, because it was such a neat ride, and it was so short-lived ultimately because it was the operating cost versus the capacity was poor, the location of it. Yeah, there was issues. There were problems.
It was like a Dueling Dragon project for a park that nowhere got near the intended attendance.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't even close to what they needed for it.
And then Togo with Windjammer Surf Racers probably looked at that and they said, oh yeah, we can do that. And they definitely could not. Not even close. But you said you liked it, babe. You said,
oh yeah, it was very cool. I mean, it was kind of hidden. You could see it from the parking lot. It kind of blew through some warehouses. It was one of those things, especially when I was a kid. It was like a legendary thing for me because that was like my big family theme park to go to, Warner Bros. Movie World. And I was, I went there once on a school trip when it was still the cop car chase years. I'm pretty confident I only ran one side though. I only rode one side, but yeah, it was just like this cool ride. And I remember going on the wave swing. I was really young. My first couple of visits when I wasn't tall enough to ride yet. And I would go on the wave swinger that was right next to the barrel rolls just to see the trains going through it. And I would just ride the wave swinger all day because I was so fascinated with it. And then ultimately I didn't ride until the cop car chase years. I think it was last year when I went on a school trip in 2006. And that was also when I rode it. So, yeah, sadness. But understandable, again. I think most of these coasters are understandable.
Yeah, a lot of these, it's like, it's the way it goes.
Next on my list is a Schwarzkopf, believe it or not. Zonga. Zonga was the original Gronerlund thriller that then was placed as Taz's Texas Tornado in Six Flags Astroworld. Then eventually it was moved to Secret Discovery Kingdom and modified to become Zonga, which was a good temporary placeholder, I will say that. I love my Schwarzkopfs. I love my Schwarzkopf loops in particular. There's just something about them. Like riding Psyche Underground the other day with Sven. It's like the best part is that loop. Like there's something about these Schwarzkopf loops that no other loopers do. Like it's like a feeling. It's
tight. Love loops.
It's such a good ride. Such a good
especially backwards.
Inversion. So I was like, all right, I want to ride like a unique looper. And Zonga always looked cool to me. Like the whole blue color scheme, the weird inversions, that 2 loops in one. It was just like a really weird looking ride. I understand why it didn't work out. They modified the ride too much to be less intense and only led to problems. And I think it was always meant to be a placeholder. But going to Discovery Kingdom a lot in my early years living in the U.S., it was always one of those things where the plot just seemed kind of like left over from Zonga. Zonga was bigger than anything that's been there since.
Yeah.
And it would have been such a cool ride to have ridden, I think. Like that legendary of a big Schwarzkopf. Because I don't have any big legendary Schwarzkopf. I've got the Looping Stars. I've got the customs like Super Duper Looper and Revolution and stuff.
Mindbender at Six Flags Over Georgia is probably...
I got Mindbender.
And like the Whizzer. Those are your legacy Schwarzkopf credits.
Not yet Olympia Looping?
I don't have Olympia Looping yet. Nope, okay. I'm missing all of the big portable ones. So there's Olympia Looping. There's this. Alpina Bahn I don't have. There was another portable one that I don't have. And then there was the big triple loop one. That was at Flamingo Land for a while. So that would have been, I think, the closest I could have gotten to getting on like a big one that was permanently stationed.
I rode both Olympia Looping and Alpina Bahn in Luxembourg. So
you did that recently.
So it's like my Luxembourg credits. Yeah, I don't know how to for me it's my Luxembourg credits, even though it's German roller coasters, I guess.
Yeah,
or German. But where you ride it is where you get the credit.
We could ride those in London. That's something I would like to do. Go to Winter Wonderland and ride those, or ride Olympia Looping at the Prater in Vienna. See how many countries I can ride it in.
From what I heard, it was James that told me that either it's in Vienna or it's in the Oktoberfest in München.
Mm-hmm.
It's might not go back to London anymore. So because it's a bit of a hassle to move everything, but it's not confirmed.
I can see that.
It's a rumor, but on the good side, normally it should return every summer to Wiener Prater. So at least there.
Perfect. I love that place.
Well, we'll have to see, but let's go to Mirabilandia in Italy.
Another Mediterranean woody.
Mm-hmm.
Sierra Tonante.
Tomato Europe and their wooden coasters, man.
I mean, yeah, it's quite something, wooden coaster. And that's one of the reasons why it would have been nice to ride this one. It was the only wooden coaster in Italy at the time, and now they don't have any anymore. Operated from 1992 to 2007, and at the time the tallest and fastest European wooden roller coaster, with 35 meters high, 1 kilometer long, 100 kilometer per hour top
That's
speed,
quite fast for a woody.
Yeah.
Wow.
That when I saw those stats, I was like, yeah, I wanted to ride that. But I mean, the weather was the most important factor here, because humid in the winter, dry in the summer, so a lot of replacement needed to be done on those tracks, especially towards the end of its life. And so that's when they gave it up. But I think Ice Speed is a worthy replacement. Totally different.
Oh, surely.
But I really like that coaster. It's a fun, snappy, Intamin launch coaster. So the way I like it. But then again, it's as we don't have that many wooden roller coasters here. Would have been nice to have ridden it, but that's life.
Okay, all right. So my next one, I love my arrows. This was another one that came to mind for me immediately when we talked about this. Was the Orient Express at Worlds of Fun. I went to Worlds of Fun in 2009, and they've sort of replaced this with Spinning Dragons, the Gerslauer spinning coaster, but not really. Spinning Dragons kind of sits in front of where Orient Express was. Orient Express was dealing with major stress fracture issues. I mean, you just go back and look at, like, Ian and I love talking about Orient Express because this ride was a freaking mess. It was...
You mean the Hot Mess Express?
Yeah, the Hot Mess Orient Express. It would clear that second vertical loop and just fly into the boomerang so much faster than, like, a lot of the other Batwing boomerang sequences on aero coasters would later be, to help prolong their life. And you came out of that thing, did a U-turn, and then went into, like, the most apeshit, stupid-looking helix I've ever seen in my life. That just seemed like it was just poorly designed on purpose. The ride was demolished in 2003. And yeah, they never truly replaced it. In 2000, they opened a Vekoma boomerang, and I feel like that was kind of their preemptive strike. Like, I think, like, by then they knew that Orient Express didn't have a lot of time left, so they're like, we better get, like, a straightforward looping coaster in here. At the time, I felt like Worlds of Fun got such a raw deal because they went from having, in the 90s as a kid, like, I was fascinated by this park, and I was so into, like, their lineup at one point was full of, like, unique custom roller coasters. They had their wooden coaster Timberwolf, they had Mamba, they had Zambezi Zinger at the time, up until 1997, actually. So that Mamba was sort of the spiritual replacement for that one. And then Orient Express, this, like, a really amazing custom looper. At one point, it held the record for most inversions with 4, alongside the Carolina Cyclone at Carowinds. And yeah, the ride this was kind of the beginning of the end for some of the more ambitious aero looper projects. I guess really Drachenfire was the beginning of the end, because that came in 98 with its demolition. But this one would have been a cool one. It was sad going in 2009 and seeing that the majority of the plot, every bit of that ride, that the space that ride took up was still empty after all those years. It's still empty. I mean, I went 6 years after it had been demolished. It has been 20 years. And all that they've done with the space that the ride occupies is, like, turn the queue and station and stuff into a haunt. It's, like, typical
very
Tier 3 Cedar Fair park behavior. They finally got a Zambezi Zinger spiritual replacement with the Zambezi Zinger Kitty wooden coaster. I hope someday they open some cool looping coaster, like a Vekoma Next Gen looper, and call it Orient Express. I don't know. Crazier things have happened. But yeah, when I first thought of this topic, this one came up right away for me.
And so I see it has intertwining loopings. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, it had interlocking loops. One of 3 aero projects.
Loops, that was But so this one has it had it. Loch Ness Monster has it. Were there others, or are these the only
the lightning loops, which were dueling arrow shuttle loops, like the one at Blackpool, but one was on top of the other, and they met in the center. They made an X shape.
So it goes Great Adventure.
So that was a
something about dueling coasters there.
Great Adventure, man.
With inversion.
That park has done some of the wildest shit with rides, truly.
Talk about some wild shit. Let's talk about Ultimate at Lightwater Valley, which is my next coaster on the list. Didn't really expect it to die when it did, so I kind of never really rushed over there.
That's a freaking shame.
Because that was one of those coasters where, like, I thought it was never going to die. Because first of all, it's Ultimate, you know? Like, who's going to take out Ultimate? That thing is, like, in the ground in a perfect weather condition for a wooden support structure. Like, none of it, to me, seemed like a good reason to be murdered in such a tragic way as it was. So, unfortunately, it did die in 2019, I guess, when it closed. And in 2022 is when they officially decided
COVID killed it.
It was going to be not reopening. For those that don't know, Lightwater Valley in Yorkshire, England, built this world's longest roller coaster back in 1991, which was just a giant terrain coaster in a way with 2 lift hills and 2 drops that just went all over this hilly terrain that was part of the park's grounds, I suppose. And it was just a high-speed, kind of rocky, train-themed roller coaster that took forever. Like, forever. Like, it just never ended. And it was really cool. And it was an RCT-inspired roller coaster.
Katie's World
had an inspired ride by it.
Yep.
And I was pretty mesmerized by this ride as a kid because you guys look so cool. And one YouTube video later, you're obsessed. You know, it's easy to do. And, yeah, so I'm pretty sure, did both of you guys ride it? I know Alex rode it. Did you ride it, Sven?
I didn't ride it, no. So,
you didn't ride it either? So sad.
Yeah, but it's one of those that I'm like, okay, it's
like it is what
it is. Because it's not that I have less regret for this one compared to others. You know, I don't know why, but
I would say it's middle of the pack for me.
It's a cool ride.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the greatest roller coaster I've ever been on, but it was certainly interesting.
It's just so different.
It was a neat one to have. But yeah, it just seemed a pity that it had to go. I feel like the only reason that it really got demolished is because Lightwater Valley just has decided to go in a different direction business model-wise with their rides, and that's just the long short of it. The people that built this ride and ran this ride and loved this ride are not the people that run Lightwater Valley today. So this ride this is one of the only coasters on this list that was really just a total victim of circumstance. Like, there was nothing wrong with the ride. It just was not economically viable for the business plan of the current owners of the park, and COVID really expedited that plan.
And I will say it's one of those roller coasters where it's so big and it's so sprawling, and the maintenance of it must be a pain in the ass. So I'm sure it wasn't ideal for the park either. What was the actual return on Ultimate after all those years? Probably not a whole lot. So I understand why it's gone, but I kind of just never thought it would see the day.
Yeah.
Next. Who's up? Sven.
Oh, this is a good one, Sven.
Yeah, so last year I went to Drayton Manor for the first time, and that's when I rode Shockwave, the Intamin stand-up coaster. At first I was terrified because it was closed. I was like, oh no, am I not going to be able to ride it today? But eventually I got to, even front seat.
Nice.
Because did I like it? Not that much, because it hurt. And yet I put this one on the list because you guys know I'm a collector. So it would have been nice to
well put.
Collect the different credits here and the 2 different types of stand-up coasters by Intamin. Because this one, the stand-up, did I already mention the name? Yeah, stand-up at Skara Summerland opened in 1988 and it closed in 1994. So yeah, I was way too small to ride it.
Because they had a ride that big.
Yeah, Skara Summerland.
That's a big ride.
Yeah, it is. That surprised me a lot as well when I was looking up coasters.
This is the park that has that weird SNS thing, right? The
Tranon. Yeah.
Of all places.
But however, the ride didn't die. It moved to La Ronde in Canada.
To be fair, that is where coasters go to die.
That is where coasters go to die. So it's the writings on the wall.
Apparently. And yeah, there it closed in 2016 eventually. But again, it's I put it on the list because it looked neat to have the collection. But yeah,
Sven, I'm really glad that you picked this one because everything that you just said is exactly what went through my mind when I rode the Shockwave at Drayton Manor. Except that when I rode the Shockwave at Drayton Manor, Cobra was still open, and I was like, "Oh, I should go to La Ronde and ride Cobra." And then a year later, they demolished it, and I'm like, "You know what? Fuck that place. I'm not going. I don't need to ride any of your stupid rides. I guess now that you've demolished the ride that I really wanted to ride."
You're saying you're not going for Edna or Latak?
Well, I would have also gone for Super Menage, and it's gone too. Yeah. And I would have loved to have ride Viper, the relocated Green Lantern First Flight from Magic Mountain.
That's a lie. You did not want to ride that.
I did, because it would have been funny.
You already had
it would have been like an internet meme come to life. Anyway, so this next coaster, Black Hole Express at Koondori Land. Probably one of the most, if not the most obscure coasters on this list. This is one that I fell back in love with after Sean and I scoured Roller Coaster Database's collection of retired roller coasters.
It turns out we were both obsessed with this ride in separate eras of our lives, and both were like, "Oh my god,
yeah,
the ride!"
I was like, one of us needs to pick this coaster as their coaster. It was a big, beautiful ride that seemed like ahead of its time. In retrospect, but then at the same time...
I need Sven to guess the manufacturer.
In the natural progression... Sven, is this a coaster? Do you have any idea what coaster we're talking about?
I'm looking at the pictures now, and I'd say either Aero or Vekoma.
It is a giant Vekoma. And this was the natural progression after a ride like Gouldrick's, building these giant loopers... I mean, this thing was massive and had these two big, beautiful loops and then would just barrel into a Sidewinder that dove underground and it had two corkscrews. Probably the most striking quality of this ride was the giant mid-air helix that it did halfway down the first drop. This thing was just so cool. It was so...
Well, it kind of reminds you of Millennium at Fantasy Island.
Oh,
and
totally.
It's like big loop, big helix kind of game, but like a bigger version of it.
And I liked Millennium, but it wasn't... Millennium was a little sluggish for me. I imagine I imagine Black Hole Express just having better pacing than Millennium, but I could just be guessing at this point. But that was just a big, beautiful... Black Hole Express is a perfect representation of why Vekoma was thriving and aerodynamics was not. Because Koondori Land is in South Korea. Also in South Korea is the Fantasia Special, a 5-inversion aerodynamics looper that just has 2 vertical loops and 3 consecutive corkscrews. And so these rides were built in the same country at the same time, using similar technology, same number of inversions by directly competing manufacturers. And one of them was this big, beautiful custom thing with 5 unique inversions. They were all ergonomically designed, and then you had Aero's attempt, which was them playing it very, very safe after the ultimate failure of Drachenfire, where it's just a couple of plug and play, cut and paste loops and corkscrews and stuff, and then the ride's over. Definitely a neat. It's just a shame. This seems like a ride that would have been a good candidate to get taken apart and sold, but it just wasn't. We were not fortunate enough for this one to relocate somewhere, because I feel like it was sturdy enough. It certainly could have been, I think, conceivably, if the timing had been right. Such is life.
Talk about big old loopers.
Oh, yes.
Next up is the Great American Scream Machine at Six Flags Great Adventure. Anyone that knows me knows I love Viper and Magic Mountain, and so the other two big mega loopers in the U.S., Shockwave and Great America Scream Machine, at Six Flags Great America and Six Great Adventure, respectively, were kind of like the previous versions of Viper. Viper's like the expanded, perfected version of it, if you can call it perfect. So Great America Scream Machine is the one I chose for this, mostly because we've been going to Six Flags Great Adventure more lately. And I feel like it was such a staple there for so much longer than Shockwave ever was at Great America. Either way, just, it was one of those power rides. I think everyone knows about this one too. Big arrow looper, legendary with its giant suspended loops. Did the ride make a whole lot of sense in hindsight? No, but I don't think a lot of arrows did. It would have been such a great ride to have ridden in my lexicon of aero coasters that I so adore. There's not much else to say about it. That's just one of the reasons why it's on my list.
One thing you have to talk about when you talk about Scream Machine is Kamikaze at Conco's Party Pier.
It's true. Kamikaze at
again,
Conco's Party Pier is now Blue Hog at Six Flags over Georgia, which is one of my favorite arrows out
just
there.
like with Black Hole Express, this is a perfect encapsulation of why one of these companies was really thriving and doing everything right the first try, because the one of these coasters was relocated and is still open and is built like a freaking tank. And one of these coasters,
it's just wild to imagine that at the same time you have Kamikaze / Blue Hog being built in this not too far away from where Great American Scream Machine was being built.
Yeah.
And Great American Scream Machine was the best that Aero could push. Like, it was like the biggest and the best they could do. But at the end of the day, it was just a formulaic loop 3 times, a broken bedwing, and double corkscrew. Is then where Kamikaze / Blue Hog had all of these intricate elements and the support structure, and it was like light years ahead already. Just how Black Hole Express was already light years ahead. But still, though, Great American Scream Machine is kind of like a legendary ride for Great America. Before Kinaka and El Toro, like, this was the ride.
It was like the first
Nitro.
like, truly legendary coaster for that park.
Yeah, this was like the big boy.
Yeah.
And then last one for me is in 2018 I did a trip to the UK where we rode both Icon and Wickerman, the new coasters of that year. But when driving from Blackpool Pleasure Beach to Alton Towers, all of a sudden I was looking around. There's like, hey, is that a roller coaster over there? And I was totally out of the blue, like, what is it? Where is it? Why haven't I heard about this? And turned out it was Nightmare at Camelot Theme Park. But yeah, it was a standing but not operating coaster at the time, because they removed it finally in 2020, but it had been closed since 2012. And it's a Schwarzkopf. It's started off as Bavarian Mountain Railroad in Kobe, Portopio land.
Kobe, Portopia land.
That thing. And as an indoor roller coaster with 5 colored trains, but then in 2007 it moved to the UK, where it only kept 3 of the trains, and so yeah, I remember being sad about it. But then, by preparing for this episode, I realized it was basically Jetline at Grönalund.
Exactly.
So
they're like identical.
Yeah, but obviously that coaster is closed now as well. It's not.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I was thinking of adding it to this list, and I was like, you know what? Let me just see if they reopen it first.
I think they're going to reopen Jetline, hopefully.
So yeah, maybe. It depends on if they will reopen Jetline or not for the people that haven't ridden this and are interested in riding it as well. But I have ridden Jetline, so it's like, okay, I kind of did it then, but not in the UK. But then again, as I said, I'm a collector, so
yeah,
it would have been nice to have both, but there you go.
Well, and I guess so I'm wrapping up our evening of coasters we could have ridden. This one is the one that hurts the most.
Yeah.
This is, of all the things that I am salty about
for it.
In this life, it is not riding the Big Bad Wolf at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. And I was there in Virginia in 2008 with some family, and we were going to go to one of the parks. We didn't have time to go to both. Originally, we were just, like, the plan was to go to Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, and King's Dominion was just kind of an afterthought. But Griffin was down. I'd read on the theme park review forums that Griffin was down. It needed a chain replacement. And I was so upset about their newest coaster being not open that I was like, well, what if we went to King's Dominion instead? Like, their new roller coaster, Dominator, is open. Like, let's go to King's Dominion. My family was all about it. We went to King's Dominion, had a great day.
You rode Volcano.
I rode Volcano that day. I rode Shockwave that day. I rode Hurler that day. All three of those coasters are gone. But I could have ridden Big Bad Wolf. And the following year, they announced that it was closing, and it just wasn't feasible for me to go up and ride it, so it was demolished. I was devastated. In fact, and I was so bitter about missing it that I didn't go to I didn't go to Busch Gardens Williamsburg for another 10 years. My first trip to Busch Gardens Williamsburg was the last major theme park in the United States that I had not been to.
And boy, were you salty.
Because I was so bitter about avoiding it. And then I was this horrible basket case. I was a mess when we were there. I was so much more bothered by it than I thought I was.
I still had to ride for Bolton on my own the other day because he was not going to ride it because it wasn't Big Bad Wolf.
Well, no, I mean, I don't mind. Verbolten is fine. Did you ride it a second time and I did something else?
Yeah, you were like not down to ride it again. And that was the same in 2018 too. You just got it for the credit, really.
Yeah, I mean, we rode it and I liked it. Wait, did you ride Verbolten twice on the last visit?
Yeah, I remember I was on my own riding it and then you waited for me at the exit.
What was I doing?
You rode something else.
Didn't
I don't know
ride?
what it was.
Was it the Lot Flume? Because I rode Sean didn't want to ride La Scoot, and I loved that ride. So
no,
it was Invader.
Yeah, I remember.
It was Invader. I wanted to ride Invader to see how it was holding up, and like that's a cute ride. It's nothing crazy, but I just thought like, I really wanted to ride it. I like to ride wooden coasters every time I'm at a park that has one because I like to see how it's aging. But you didn't want to ride it, so I rode Invader while you rode Verbolten a second time. I've got no beef with Verbolten. It's a cute ride, but I just really regret not going to ride Big Bad Wolf. There's no guarantees that I would have gone to King's Dominion either in those 10 years, and which would have meant that I would have missed out on Volcano and some other stuff. But I'm really grateful to have Volcano and the Togo stand up, and I guess Hurler. But yeah, Big Bad Wolf. Missing out on Big Bad Wolf when I totally could have ridden it is like my biggest roller coaster regret ever.
So to round out the episode.
If people are still here.
Yeah, if you're still here.
It's a long one this time.
Remember how we used to have seasons where like the episodes were all like 2 hours?
Yeah.
This is long for this season, but it's not long in the grand scheme of things. So
but
now,
it's important. It's important.
Yeah.
We need to figure out what do we think is going to close next? Like what big major roller coaster? I'm not going to say like small coaster, like a big major roller coaster is probably on the chopping block.
Yeah.
That's a hard one for me.
The first one that I want to mention is Desperado.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That thing, I don't know if we can even rightly say that it exists.
Yeah, that's the thing. That I was unsure about including it, but, I mean, you never know that it reoopens. But
to be fair, it's still standing up, not operating, and they are still cycling it every month.
It is you're right.
It
is technically operable.
Well, it's not operable, but it's still standing.
It functions. They can send a train out, but they just can't run it with people legally.
Okay,
so
that's a good one.
Yeah, if people see it open, go for it, because
Gosh, yeah, I've been saying that for years.
If it was open at Flight to Vegas tomorrow.
I was gonna say if we got
go.
an email today saying that the ride was open, I would drop my entire life and go and ride it.
That's such a good ride.
And we've already ridden it too.
I've ridden it so many times, and I want to ride it again.
That was one of our first dates.
I was on
a layover in Las Vegas, and Sean drove up from LA and picked me up.
In the parking lot, waiting to ensure it was running because it was only running like once every 15 minutes. So you weren't sure.
Yeah.
Like driving by didn't mean anything. You had to be there and make sure it was open.
It was so romantic.
I love that ride. What do I think? So I think realistically, a lot of the talk in our circles is that Viper at Magic Band will eventually eat dust. It did just invest a lot of money a couple years ago in redoing all of the brakes and all the hydraulics for the brakes and the computer system. But, like we just displayed in this episode, there's rides receiving completely new elements like replacing entire piece of track and then closing that same year. So, or being open for 3 whole days or 2 hours, doesn't matter. Like nothing is forever. So I would be super surprised if Viper may eventually eat dust. I would hope not, but I can imagine it happening. It's living a very long life for an aero looper. Let's not lie.
I just thought of mine just now while you were talking because I remember. You guys remember when there was rumors in 2018 about Vortex at Kings Island being demolished, and the park even came out on social media and said that the rumors about Vortex being on the chopping block are very exaggerated. Like the ride's not going anywhere, and then 1 year later, it was gone.
It was gone.
It was gone. And the park apparently was really not happy about that. It was just the ride was in a lot worse shape than they thought it was in. It was like 2019, like was the year that they really could not.
So what are you thinking?
Actually, I might have two. Considering we just rode Anaconda and you just brought up Viper, Anaconda would seem, I think, an even more likely candidate for the chopping block in the next couple of years than Viper.
Why?
Because I think Anaconda, they're about the same age, but Anaconda I don't think runs as well as Viper does.
No, that's true.
And also, I don't think Anaconda's as well liked. And Magic Mountain is more... I think Magic Mountain cares more about keeping Viper open than King's Dominion cares about keeping Vortex open. Or than keeping Anaconda open. So that one I just think it doesn't have the public opinion that Viper has. People like Viper a lot. I mean, I think people like Anaconda too, but just not to the same degree. And I think Anaconda could be next. The other one, going back to the Kings Island social media tangent, there was rumors swirling around that Kumba at Busch Gardens Tampa was going to be demolished. And then the park came out and addressed and said, it's not going anywhere. And I'm like, I've heard this before. Like, this is exactly what happened with Vortex, where people had perfectly logical reason to think that it was going to be demolished, and then the park said no, and then a year later, it was gone.
Well, what I think is that people have perhaps gotten wind of a extended closure, or just like a closure, not reopening date, or permits, and that could all be very well related to the fact that Kumba is the oldest big B&M looper around, and it's gonna be time to replace the track at some point. Because Hoke already got replaced, and Kumba operates almost the same amount of hours. The overall lifetime of Hoke day one to retrack versus Kumba day one to retrack, they probably have about the same amount of hours, realistically. So I wouldn't be surprised if Kumba is just really going to need to get completed retracks. I just don't think it's going to go anywhere except for that the track is going to be replaced. It's still a perfectly popular ride.
Fingers crossed that
lots of new signage has been built lately.
Because now that Nemesis is going through that. All the towers.
I just think that we're going to get to a phase where B&Ms are just going to get their tracks replaced. But they're such good, smooth. Like, it's almost like a brand of coaster that you don't need to retire. You just need to, like, replace it.
You just retrack
because they're just really good rides. They're like arrows where, like, you just got to kick them all out. But realistically, I think that's what Kumba's going to go through.
I hope so. But I guess I would say that I think the flesh of Kumba is not long for this world, and I think it's inevitable based on the evidence that we have. The evidence that not only Universal has given us, but now Alton Towers has made it clear that coasters from this particular era are starting to have, I guess, irrevocable... they're sustaining damage that's incompatible with safe operation.
Sure.
Aging, metal fatigue, the whole bit. So
what about
those are my
Accelerator at Knott's Farm?
So they just got all the pieces in that had to be custom manufactured, and they're installing them now. So they're expecting test cycling in the next few weeks. If I hadn't known that, I would have said, like, it's finally time, because it has been standing dormant for almost 2 years now, and it did that before, and it's done it before. Like, it's always, like, Accelerator is honestly never up. And so they just repainted it, and they just got all the parts in. So if it wasn't for me knowing they got the parts in and they're working actively on the track, I would have probably said, like, maybe this is finally the downtime that killed it. But that thing is indestructible because it's still there.
It's a tank.
Like, they will not give up on that ride.
And if it shits the bed again, they're going to do what they're doing with Top Thrill Dragster.
I was about to say,
mark my words.
Maybe some Perla can do something
that'd
with
be
it.
a cute look.
It would be super cute.
Knott's Berry Farm, call me.
Yeah.
We got to talk.
I don't care if they have to demolish Supreme Scream to do it. Whatever it takes. If Top Thrill Dragster is a success, and it works. I almost feel like they're going to do that to Accelerator, and it will only be a matter of time.
That's a really cute look. I didn't think about that.
I have
Okay.
one more. That's what. It's just one that I'm surprised that it's still running, and that's Boomerang at Bellewaerde Park. To mention one in Europe as well. So I'm like, first Boomerang. How is it still there? But yeah, so far they repainted it this year. Quite like the new colors of it. It's on our wedding pictures. So, but yeah, I'm surprised that it's still running, and especially with the Ride to Happiness now also so close. It's like, will they at some point add a new thrill coaster? Or I know that it's not really their target group, so I guess it's still there because it's there. But and next year is the big investment in a water type attraction that
that crazy
will be so crazy
rapids thing that they're doing.
Right.
Yeah, the rapid slide or with
That thing looks really
elevator
cool and also terrifying.
Yeah, but
It's kind of giving Vertigo with water.
we'll see.
And with that, we're gonna wrap up this episode, this newest episode in season 5.
Yes.
Make sure to follow us on Threads, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, all the above. Visit thecoasterkings.com for new articles, news, lists, all the good stuff. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.